I can hear you now. That was interesting. So I've no idea what glitch caused that, but I couldn't hear anything anywhere there. So
probably for the best.
Right, I'm going to have to find. I'm now speaking to my phone, which allows me only to see 3 people at a time, and I'm holding it in my hand, so I need somewhere to put it. Hold on a moment. The wonders of modern technology are a thing to behold, aren't they? God almighty. No, that's not going to work.
8. 23. Well, we'll definitely core it because we've got 23 members, so that's good.
Fantastic. So that's all good. So are we good enough to go? I do apologise for my tardiness in starting the meeting. I had a little bit of a technical nightmare there. So thank you for everybody who was patient, and for all those people who replied to me when I was asking for help. So before we start the meeting, can I just talk you through some of the protocols? This is the first time that we've met virtually, so we just need to sort out a few things. If we can start off by having a principle that if we can have all the microphones turned off, so if we can all mute, and if you would like to use the hand up button to speak, and Sue will be able to see who's got their hand up because her screen is now bigger than mine, so I won't be able to see that. So if Sue, you could prod me in the direction of people who put their hand up, that would be great. There are a number of matters that will require a vote this evening, and on those matters that require a vote, we will just use the hand up feature for everybody who is in favour, and then everybody who is against, and then everybody who wishes to abscond themselves, abdicate that vote, so we get an idea of numbers. And if I can just make a slight change to the agenda, I think it would be proper to start off with agenda item 10, which concerns the regulations at this meeting. So if we can start with that before we go through the minutes of the previous meeting, that would be great. Hopefully right, I've got a few questions there. A couple of people have not got a hand up button. So if you are on a PC, then on the toolbar on the bottom of your screen there should be a series of controls. If you press the dots there, if the hand up doesn't show, there should be another menu that says raise my hand, and that is the same for anybody using a phone as well. Can everybody see that? Has anybody got an issue with the hand up function? If you just put it on the chat, that would be great. Anybody saying anything there? Sue, I can't see anything. That one hasn't come up on my screen. Ah, yes. I've got when I pay. So I've got a question from when somebody can't see.
Sue Ralph still can't see it.
Okay.
Somebody said there that they press the 3 dots. It's still not there. The hand icon's next to the 3 dots on the toolbar.
Yeah, it should be there. Thank you, Sean. Can we all just have a play with that? Still can't see it. A few people have raised their hands and put their hands down. I'm guessing there are people experimenting with it.
Yeah.
Have a look. It's hard without knowing what device you're on to see where they are. So
Yeah.
if you're on it's the hand icon.
Rebecca's on a laptop.
A laptop. It should be there on the hand icon on a laptop.
Can you still not see it, Rebecca? And if you
On
press
an
the
Apple,
three
it should
dots,
be
you don't get the option
No, it's
there
not.
as well.
It has been on there previously. It's not on there. It's on the three dots to press it. Conversation is next to the three dots, or share. There is no hand icon on it. I'm sorry. I could just say yes in the chat. Could I or agree or no, whatever.
I think we might have to use the chat if a lot of people are struggling with the hand icon. We might just have to use the chat for comments or voting.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. So, can everybody access the chat function?
I can do that.
Okay, that just makes it a slightly more difficult. Sue, if we do that, then we'll just say, everybody say yes or no, or A, for the votes then, and you'll be able to see that down the side, won't you, Sue?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do that then. And we thought it was going to be easy, didn't we? We
Yeah,
thought it would be all lovely
hands
because
were
we're
down.
doing it online. Okay. So if we can then, if we can't think if there are any other protocols that we need to talk through now. So please use the chat and please use the hand up if you need. And then Sue, if you can point me to those attention in case I miss it. For everybody's attention, this is a public meeting, so it will be recorded, and it is possible for that recording to be shared publicly. So if we can just make sure that when we're speaking, we speak clearly, and so our concerns, thoughts, questions can be heard and answered as thoroughly as we can this evening. Okay, so without further ado, though, if we can then go to item 15, which just explains the regulations, and this is simply a paper that brings to our attention the amendment to the regulation. And has everybody got access to that paper? Yeah, or not? Do we have any questions about that? It's simply saying that we can have a meeting remotely, and it gives us some information about how the meeting is conducted. Are we all happy with that? Fantastic. Just nod. If I've got no hands up that I can see, Sue, and no notes on the chat. No, excellent, fantastic. Okay, if we can move on, I can just welcome everybody. If I could see on the big screen who was here, I would welcome you all individually, but we should be able to see the participants. If you're on a big screen, you should be able to view the participants. I can't actually see that on my screen at the moment because I'm now on my phone. But can I just thank you for coming this evening? We will try and keep it as brief as possible, and if we can go through then on the papers that you've had, if we can start off with the minutes of the previous meeting. If we can start off with the attendance. Is the attendance okay? Just put your hand up or write anything on the notes on the chat for any questions about anything on page 1 of the minutes. Okay, anything on page 2? Okay, anything on page 3? Or page 4? Some of those issues will be covered in the main meeting. Page 5. Again, we've got a paper on that this evening. Page 6. Marvellous. Page 7. If anybody is struggling at any point with the hand up or the chat, put your microphone on and shout out, just in case you miss you. Okay. Have anything on the final page 8? Excellent. So could we verify that they are a true record? Can somebody, does anybody like to vouch for that? Please. Thank you very much. And the second, please. Thank you very much. Thanks very much. Okay, so if we then move on to agenda item 3, which is Carol. Is Carol here?
Yep, I am.
Yep. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
So this is your item on the early years. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, everybody. So the item 3 is giving you an update of the Early Years School Forum Working Group, and in particular the response to the COVID-19 situation across the summer term. The working group has been meeting regularly, weekly if not fortnightly, and some meetings have been joined by Paul Boyce himself, Director for Children's Services. So it's been a real joint effort in the response. So I'll bring you to item 2.1, which is around the 2, 3 and 4 years entitlements. So from the announcement on March 17, when we were moving into lockdown, and early years settings were asked to provide critical childcare for key workers or vulnerable children as identified as a priority. And in response, the government made a commitment that they would continue and maintain the entitlements that were to be paid out to all settings across the summer period, if they obviously if they weren't required and they closed or they were partially open. So Wirral's response to that was that we did that. We left all funding with settings through the summer term. And specifically, we rescheduled the summer term payments so that they were paid ahead of time and could at best support settings to do some projections of their financial incomes at that point. There was a slight adjustment as we moved through that post to Easter to the head counts and the way that the head count would operate. So for schools, that's moved to some manual proportionments, but all is in place, and that should have all been ironed out. In relation to the next point, 2.2, in terms of double funding, where we were identifying where settings were closed and key worker or vulnerable children were still needing to have placements, we double funded. So we collected all through the registers. We've been doing early years registers for the Department of Education all through this period, and where we had to place a child in a different setting, we've left the funding with the original setting and double funded. It has been small numbers. In the main, most settings have been very accommodating, that were required to be open, and all key workers particularly were finding alternative childcare amongst themselves as families. So to date, in the paragraph just above 2.3, there's been just about £6,500 that's been identified to support the double funding of children to maintain that they can access their settings. In terms of 2.3, highlighting sufficiency, as I've outlined there, we have weekly, we've been doing twice weekly returns to the Department for Education. That has just moved to weekly returns on registers of attendances. And we've had there has been sufficient places for all children as identified. At the point of lockdown, there was a high, when we did an analysis of who might need provision, and there was a high number that came back in terms of demand, which is highlighted just under the sufficiency. Around 1,500 places were identified as being required. However, when it actually came to the point of taking those places up, due to parents' anxieties really of continuing with childcare, and the flexibility that was required to respond. In the main, a lot of providers had NHS workers in placement. The number significantly reduced. However, we did have sufficient childcare and places across the period. Moving down to section 2 and moving on to page 11, it just indicates there some of the numbers that we were originally outlining, but over time, from the 1st of June, when the relax started to come through and settings were asked to increase their take-up for all age children, as it was for early years, we very quickly saw almost a 50% increase of settings opening, and also a significant rise of key worker children. So across that whole period, there has been sufficient places, although the caveat there says that due to the number of registers coming through, it doesn't give you a full and frank picture, and settings responding that their key workers were required to be hands-on, and it wasn't always easy to get the returns through. So just moving down onto the key area for childcare across Wirral during the summer term and the COVID-19 situation. At 2.4 outlines the financial difficulties faced, and that links again to sustainability. What we saw was initially when we went into lockdown, a third of settings remained open, 2/3 closing, and the high majority of those were childminders. Over the period of time, we've been supporting those settings that remained open, and there's been good relations with the local authority in doing so. And it outlines in 2.4, we were able to secure some funding for a childcare response exceptionally circumstance discretionary scheme, secured £350,000 for access of providers that remained open, that were experiencing real difficulties in their financial footprints. And that was in the main, particularly where they had, although there was a high number of schemes that seemed to come through from government, there was always some fallout of criteria or eligibility for providers, and it still wasn't meeting the demand of continued fixed costs against the reduced private income from families that weren't needing that childcare, against obviously the funding rates of early years. So we've been able to support around 58 providers. We've had 63 applications over 2 set periods, 63 providers and the second round saw a high number of childminders being supported through that fund, which has been a positive. We do have around 64,000 still remaining in that fund that we will use across the summer term and support with the continued identification into the September-autumn term, when again the providers are telling us that will be another key moment, as most of them that are open now are almost maximised their bubbles, if you like. And when they've maximised their bubbles, they've put that prohibits the additional income that they can bring into their settings. So financial sustainability has been most of the discussions across the summer period. And then moving on to point 3, which brings us on to page 12. Over the last meeting or two, we've started to look to the future and talk about business as usual. Our 2-year funded population, they weren't identified as being within the vulnerable cohort, so that kind of piece of work was placed on hold over the period. The vulnerable cohort, as you'll know, being those with social workers or on the EHCP pathway. But now the Department for Education have now urged the local authorities to move forward with our 2-year funding cohort. So we're starting to do that engagement again with families identified as eligible, and support them into gaining access into their early years provision. We're also, because funding has been such a key discussion point, and we're very mindful of the sustainability concerns, we're looking at, we've put together a working group that will look at the early years funding entitlement rates that will come into play for 21-22. And starting to have those discussions around those funding rates, and a positive with Paul Boyce being aware of these discussions as being supportive in taking those discussions back to the Department for Education, you know, as in terms of early year and understanding of the early years funding. We're aiming to go out for a consultation in the autumn with some proposals to the sector on Wirral's funding entitlement rates. 3.3 is focused on the inclusive practice funding, which is for those children identified as needing additional support to access their free entitlements. The funding was placed on hold during the COVID-19 period. We did have a panel in May. There was a very small number that came through. What we found during the period was either our children with SEND or children with additional identified needs were those that didn't come back out to take up childcare, and they've been a cohort that we've targeted through home learning specifically. So that funding has been placed on hold until we can engage our children and families back into the settings to support them accessing the Inclusive Practice Fund. But what we have done, last year we provided transitional support for children on Inclusive Practice Funds, which was a first 6-week support fund for primary schools in reception. And what we're aiming to do this year is extend that. So any child known to the early years SEND team on transition into reception this year, I think there's around 101 that's on the list, we would offer that funding as a transitional support package for in response to the COVID-19. Okay, and that links to the transitions on 3.4. Big piece of work at the moment is the preparing for transitions of all children, and we have just done a big piece of work with our educational psychologists on transition, on a transition toolkit, which is should, I think, primary schools hopefully will get some nods, will be aware of it, or they'll be aware of it very soon, and that's supporting practitioners, parents, and the child, most importantly, on their transitions across this period. So there's a lot of work been undertaken, and hopefully a lot of good practice being put into place, and some funding support for the sector, but very mindful. We've got summer term coming up, and it's still awaiting further guidance on that and our September intakes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Carol. We have got one question that's come up from Elaine that I'll just read out there. It's on the chat. So, can schools access some of that funding for childcare during the summer holidays for vulnerable pupils? So, Carol, do you know the answer to that? I think that was in the 3.1 when that came up, or 3.2 as part of the early years. Do we know if schools can access any of that funding?
Okay, if it's in relation to the Exceptional Circumstances Fund, the Cabinet paper was to support childcare that were, it was a business model, if you like, a business support model around the childcare, so I wouldn't see that they would access that fund. But in relation to accessing funding for summer holidays for vulnerable pupils, I'll certainly take that back and have further discussions within the early years working group.
Okay, so Elaine, do you want to ask anything further on that? You just raised your hand.
Yeah, it was just when you've got when you offer holiday clubs. So it was actually childcare, not education in a sense. It's just when schools may offer it themselves or have providers that do that. So some of our children who are vulnerable could maybe access that, our 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds.
Thank you, Elaine. I'll certainly take it back. I know we're waiting on the guidance to come through around the summer operations, if you like, this week, and it certainly is something that had to serve as a discussion across the vulnerable children group with education and social care, which I'm in that group with them, Elaine, so I'll certainly take that back. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. It sounds like that's part of the sector is having a really difficult time in the current economic climate. So thank you for all the hard work there, and pass on our best wishes to everybody in that team. Any more questions for Carol before we can note this report? No? Okay, thank you very much, Carol. Much appreciated. Okay, so if we then move on to item 4, which is the report from Tarun on the Claremont Sports College proposal to change place funding. Okay, and this will require a vote from all members. So non-members can't vote on this, but this will be all members of forum that will be asked to indicate their thoughts on this. So Tarun, are you with us?
I am, Chair.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you. Claremont School contacted us in the early part of the year, talking about the increasing numbers that they've got on roll and the increasing inquiries parents have been making to attend their school. It's a very popular school, it's a very good school, well, it's an extremely good school, and it meets a particular need, a profile of need in the local area within the maintained sector. Claremont's numbers have been going up for a number of years, so I suspect for those of you that's been around a while, this will not be a surprise to you that there is again this year additional pressure on pupil numbers for September 20. There's also been a change in the type of profile of special educational need that the school has had coming through the doors. And it seems to have gone from a moderate, mild learning difficulties, which is the traditional role, to more of students with autistic spectrum condition, and there's also a large number of pupils have social, emotional and mental health difficulties. So there's been a clear shift in the profile of needs as well as an increase in the number of pupils. So two things together, we've been in discussions with the head teacher and some of the governors have met as well. And what the governors have approached the local authority with is, can they increase their numbers from 216 to 226, so 10 additional places. So if I just pause there a moment, the 10 additional places that we're asking would be all funded at £10,000 each. And in addition to that, if that was agreed, they would also get the appropriate banding level. There are more pupils going to attend Claremont in September than the 226. So the 216 on pupil admission number now, plus the 10, takes us to 226. There's actually more pupils attending than 226. It's about 244. We're only asking for 10 more places from 216 to 226. We're not asking from 216 to 244. And the governors of the school know this. We're taking a position on place funding generally, and this seemed an opportunity just to present that position. So we don't expect every time pupil numbers go over the pupil admission number to be charged £10,000 per pupil. That's not the position we're taking. And from what I've just told you there, we're only asking up to 226, but the numbers are actually at 244. So Claremont know that, and this principle that every place that goes over pupil admission numbers won't attract to 10,000. That's what we're trying to give clarity and certainty. There's lots of pressure on the high needs funding block, which will come in subsequent reports later in the meeting. So we are very mindful of the reports to follow in the latter part of this meeting. But as you will know, in January, which was reported that there was resources available for 40 additional places. So if you agree to these 10 places, this would be 10 of those 40. The school has a modest surplus balance, but as you know again from the previous reports, we're in discussions with the leadership of the school about a figure of 119,500 for specialist provision. Those discussions are still ongoing. So their surplus balance perhaps isn't what we think it is, and it won't be the same in future years. That's it, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Tarun. And any questions for Tarun? Okay, so I've got another question from Elaine. So why are there far more pupils attending, and why are they only asking to increase future numbers below the current? Surely this needs to be reviewed and a strategy developed. Tarun?
Why are there far more pupils attending? It's a very, very popular school with parents. I think that's it really. It meets a particular profile of needs. It's an excellent school. You'll know about its accreditation with autism, and I think all those factors come together to make it a very popular destination for local people. Why are they only asking to increase future numbers below current? I think I'm understanding that right, Chair. The school would want all their places funding at £10,000. It's the local authority who's saying we can only afford 10 places. It's not the school saying that. And surely this needs to be reviewed as a strategy developed. There's going to be a larger strategy on the DSG, which I've informed the Chair about very recently, because of the overspend, which will come in the later reports.
Has that answered your questions, Elaine, to your satisfaction?
No. It's not whether it's popular or not. As a special school, obviously there's a strategic view here, isn't there? So if they're asking to increase their numbers way below what they currently got, surely that needs to be looked at and reviewed, because it's not about it being popular. It's about the needs of the children going there and the flexibility and capacity for that school. What's net capacity? And therefore, do you need a full review? You can't really do Claremont in isolation to the rest. I don't see that strategic. I just don't get that. Sorry.
I don't think that this is a part of a strategy at the moment, Elaine. I think this is about an allocation of places where it is indicated that is the best place for the pupil. But the
places have already been allocated if the children are there. How have they got there then? Because it's for allocation, isn't it?
This is, if you look at the recommendations, Elaine, this is about an agree to an increase in places this year from 216 to 226. This is an increase of 10 places.
I understand that. It seems strange that you get allocated a place through a process because it's a special school. So if students have been allocated places there way beyond their capacity, and they're asking, it just seems not a very well thought out position. It seems to be obviously a far deeper situation than that would suggest, that's all. But I'm happy to,
Yeah, it is a difficult situation, and there are some underlying questions that we'd ask about what we know about the demographic moving forward and the way that those services in the special sector are commissioned, and if that's part of the wider strategy. And I think that's something that Tarun has been talking to us about for the last few months. Is that part of something that's being reviewed at the moment, Tarun?
Yeah, as you all know, there was the big external review by the Premier Advisory Group. That's formed part of discussions where we're looking at the sufficiency of specialist places. And the reason Claremont has come to the fore is Claremont put themselves forward very early on in the calendar year, and they approached us we've had a situation where there's a large number of parents have expressed a preference for Clare Mount, and in our maintained sector, it's excellent. There's no way around it. And the alternative to not giving them a place at Clare Mount is the independent sector, which will be far more costly.
And that's something that we're all very keen to avoid spending more on that independent sector. I've got a question. Elaine, I'll come back to you in a moment. Okay. I've got a question from Helen. So there's an acknowledgement that there's a need for those 10 extra places, but maybe not in the long term. So Turin, is this a 1-year plan? And is that based on need?
Yeah, I think we will need the 10 places not only this year, beginning September, in subsequent years as well. So I'm asking the forum if it can be a permanent change, which we call a place change notification, which is a formal process we undertake in November. So I don't think next year, this time next year or subsequent years, that those places will be empty. I think they'll all be allocated.
Okay.
Adrian,
sorry, yes?
There's also a question from Dave Spencer. What is the net capacity?
Yeah, Elaine asked that as well, so I was going to ask that one as well.
Oh, sorry. I didn't, because you jumped it, I didn't think you'd seen it.
No, Elaine mentioned that in her question. So, Elaine, you had your hand up just then. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, all it was is it's I recognise it's not that we don't celebrate the success of the school. We recognise that, and we just want to make sure that school has the capacity and the funding to meet the needs of those children. We see it's doing an excellent job, and we've got more children. So after the 10 places more, when they've actually got loads more children in there. So that was all it was. It wasn't that we couldn't give money. It's just around understanding the position moving forward when they've got so more money, more pupils in there currently.
Okay, so we'll go back to that first question, and then I think Sean put his hand up next. So first of all, do we have an idea of the net capacity of that school? And if we are exceeding it, is this going to cause some additional costs for increasing the capacity of that school, Karun?
Yeah, it's going to cause some challenges, and we'll be working with a gentleman called Mike Woozy and Jeanette Royal, mainly Mike, and he's going to put a double mobile classroom on their site, and that will increase the capacity, and it's going to have washing facilities as well due to the COVID situation. There is a situation going forward because putting mobiles on school sites is not our preferred position as a council. So we'll work with Mike and Jeanette, who will deal with capital funding, and to see what we can do in future years to make it a more permanent position.
Okay, and before we go over to Sean, is the state of the high needs estate, the capital estate, is that part of an ongoing review? Because it seems that if we're putting temporary accommodation in on what would be a permanent change in numbers, that might not be the most cost-effective use of the capital programme. Just a question. So is that estate part of a longer-term review, Kieran?
Yeah, so Chair, we're trying to bring together some different parts of funding. So we've got one part which I call capital, and that's what Mike Woozy and Jeanette Royal deal with. And they've got various funding streams. That's not the area I normally associate with, but I've jumped in to try and align things with another part of the funding called high needs funding, which I sometimes call revenue funding. And what we're trying to do is bring together two different parts. So when we want something permanent, or we put something a temporary structure in place, there's enough money for the capital side of it now, and that can be sustained, and also there's enough money to actually fill it with children and to pay the appropriate place funding and any bandings or top-ups they need. So those two things are coming together. It's early days, but the work has started.
Okay. So we had Sean put his hand up, I think, first.
Thanks, Adrian. All I was going to say, just to add before we're talking about the extra 10 places, whether it's permanent or for a year, I think what Taryn's saying basically is that, it would be an increase in place funding as an interim measure while the review he talks about is taking place. As you know, we've had the independent review from Premier Advisory Group, and we're still sort of building on the outcome of that. So I think whilst it wouldn't be a 1 year stopgap funding, it would be sort of subject to any outcome of the eventual review of the overall high needs block.
Okay, thank you for that, Sean. Did somebody else put their hand up as well? Sorry, I can't see who's got the hand up. Sue, has anybody else got the hand up?
No, there's been a couple more questions though.
Yes. So the first question was that does that mean that in the future a new build will be required? I think Sean's just answered that about the report on the high needs block. Is that answered the question? Do we feel that that's covered by that review? And the second question is that there is is this far more complex situation? Well, I think that Tarun, would you agree that this is a more complex question, and that this request for 10 extra places is to meet an immediate need and will be reviewed at some stage in the coming months and years?
Yes, Chair. It's one part of a very large, complex issue that's just got a little bit more complex, as you will hear later in the meeting, because of the deficit position on the DSG. It is responding to parental preference, which has been significant this year, as you can see from the numbers. And it's not just that we're trying to meet the aspirations for our children that the parents have in Wirral. It's that what's the alternative? So if we turn around to the parents and say, we're not increasing capacity there, either permanently or temporarily, you can't go, then the children have to go somewhere, and that has a cost as well. So it's not a neutral decision. So if we don't send 10 children, for example, to Clare Mount, because we say it's full, if we use that colloquial term, those 10 children have to go somewhere, and then you have to look at the maintained specialist sector first in Wirral. Where else can meet that profile of needs? And if the answer is you found somewhere, that is fantastic. If the answer is you haven't found somewhere, or they're full themselves, then you have to look in the independent sector. And 10 places in the independent sector is more pressure on the public purse than 10 places at Claremount. Plus, to be frank, Claremount is an excellent school, so why wouldn't we want to send more people there?
The only reason we might want to consider that question, Tarun, is that we have quite a range of excellent mainstream schools, and the national picture is that Wirral have more children, especially in special facilities, than normal, than is average for a local authority of our description. So maybe we need to look into the mainstream estate and see what we can do to offer more avenues for those to come into what is more the picture nationally. So the question isn't always independent, is it? The question, some of the answers to that are looking at the mainstream providers. I've got Kate Brown here, that we had several reviews over the year which have cost quite a lot of money, yes, but we're still being reactive rather than strategic, and that's something, Tarun, that you mentioned right at the beginning about this emerging strategy. Anything you'd like to add on that one?
Yes, Chair. As you know, we've talked briefly and wrote to you recently, very, very recently, So we're going to meet with our colleagues in finance, some of whom are on the line now with us, and we're going to bring two elements of the council, well, three elements of the council together. One is the capital side, one is the revenue, as I refer to it, or high needs side, and the other is the finance side. And we're going to come up with a strategy to manage the DSG, the whole of the DSG, as far as I can tell.
Yes, and that's covered in a later paper, isn't it? Later on this meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so
We've got another hand up. John Weiss has got his hand up.
sorry, John, missed your hand there.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to visit Claremont. I agree with Turin, it is a school. I agree that the building of some the two mobiles, I'm sure it has been negotiated with the school if they're happy with it, and that's fine, but that's not a long-term solution. There is some dire need of investment for the school. Secondly, the regards to the funding, the students are already going to the school, and there is a high pressure on special schools to be able to provide the all the facilities, education that they require. And so the additional 10 places, it surely makes a lot of sense. But they could go as an alternative, whether it's mainstream or out of borough placements or private placements. They're already at Claremont, and surely the additional funding for those 10 places will ease some of the pressures on the school, with also the additional problems that they've had with that £190,000 about at the last meeting. Not a long-term solution because the school building needs improvements, but for the moment it makes a lot of sense, so I'm all for it.
Okay, thank you for that, John. Right. So we've got a few more questions here. So Mark says, would it be helpful to hear the bigger picture before we decide on this issue? I think we have two papers here, both which require immediate decisions for the short term. Corinne, what do you? It's hard. I could postpone the vote until after the school budget paper, but we really should do it as part of this agenda item. And I've got another question by an unnamed head teacher. I think the increase in the special school sector should be planned for strategically, and the local authority should be examining the balance between children being supported in mainstream schools and those requiring specialist school support. So Taryn, your thoughts on those two questions?
The bigger picture is to provide for children's special educational needs. The presumption is for mainstream education. That presumption has been around for about 6 years now. It has been reinforced with my arrival, but there is no getting away from the fact that even our excellent secondary mainstream schools, some of them are at capacity. And so when we have a profile of need that we think needs to go into special school and the parent thinks it needs to go into special school, we need sufficiency of places to be able to meet that demand. Demand for either increasing numbers, which we're facing, and demand for severity of need, which we're facing. And it's both at Claremont at the moment. The bigger picture will emerge as the meeting goes on with the subsequent papers from finance colleagues. We're going to have a special educational needs offer in the local area that we can afford. At the moment, we're running at a deficit in the DSG, and we're going to have to make some choices in the near future about not just about mainstream and special, but about where are we spending that money. There's been some progress already on the work. I think it was reported in January at one level, and that we've managed to recover that position somewhat. But there is no doubt about it, the strategic plan that we're hoping to draft with our capital colleagues and finance colleagues will have to be affordable and have to strike that balance between the mainstream sector, which we have some excellent schools, and the special schools, which we have some excellent schools as well.
Okay. Thank you, Tarun. Okay. So I take your point, Elaine, about the bigger picture is vital, but as Tarun's just said, this is part of a bigger issue that we need an immediate discussion, a needed immediate decision on. Is that right, Tarun?
Yeah, I think what you're not, there are other requests from other schools that we haven't brought to you because there is a bigger picture going on and we're not agreeing everything everybody's saying. We're not even agreeing everything that Claremont are saying. We're just agreeing the 10 places. So we found some common ground that they can move forward and meet the needs of their children. But we found an affordability level that we think we can manage and the pressures of the public purse. There are other schools, which I think it would be unfair to name them because they would have had no notice at all that were going to be named in this meeting, that have approached us for place funding or banding. So we are looking at more, we're not just looking at Claremont and Foxfield, we've looked at quite a few schools, and as you know there's a review of bases going on. 1 or 2 of the bases have been reviewed now.
Okay. So, Greg, that you asked a question there about where that sits, and I think Taryn's just tried to answer that. And Elaine, our position is not to see all of those requests in a public forum. That's Tarun's role to make those decisions and bring his suggestions to forum. I don't think we need to look at every single school's application. I don't think that's our remit as a forum. Do either Greg or Elaine want to ask anything further? If you just, Greg, you want to put your mic on?
No, I think you sort of touched on it a little bit. Just quite difficult without. I know you say Taryn should bring those things to wider budget impact on what this body's about. Is that money will come from the DST? Is it? Or,
Greg, I don't know if anybody else can hear you, but I can't hear you. Do you want to try typing that? Sorry, your sound just didn't come through then. Elaine, while Greg's typing that, do you want to?
I'm not against the funding going to Claremont. It's just, how do we know? I don't mean individually. How do we know how many places we need across the special sector, and how can we make decisions based on only a tiny bit of the picture? Otherwise, each year you'll be going backwards and forwards with immediacy, making the decisions rather than strategically. That's all.
Well, what we can ask then is that we have some idea of the demographic going forward, so that we get some projection for school places in all of the special sector placements. Is that the sort of thing you want, Elaine?
Yeah, I think otherwise, if you think of a household bill, you're paying all your bills, and you might give lots of people money, and then by the time you got to the end of it, you haven't got enough money left. So there's only one pot. And you just need to know how it's to be shared out for the good of the children.
Okay,
really.
So there is that in the paper on the Hindley block is reported on 4 times a year when we do the school's budget setting. So that's the avenue for that, and we have seen that, and I think we've got that in a later paper today, and that gives you an idea of the issues across the sector. So if we can maybe for the next forum have a look at those places and the place allocation, against the demographic? Would that make people feel a bit more comfortable? And Greg, have we got your... This is Greg typing without the use of his PA. It's quite amusing to watch. While we're waiting,
Just move
Lisa...
on, sorry.
Okay, Lisa, you put your hand up.
I learned the IT skills from you, didn't I?
Yeah, no, it's just really to reiterate, I think, what's just been said. The issue we've got is that every time we come to talk about high needs placements, we've got these same questions and these same challenges to understand that longer term strategy. And I don't think there's anybody in this meeting that would dispute whether those places are needed at the moment, because clearly the students are already there and therefore we would like to support that. But we really need to look carefully at how we're going to come back from the situation that we've got with our high needs funding. And that's why it feels slightly at odds to be agreeing to extra places and spending when we know that there's a much bigger picture still for us to grapple with. And I think that's why so many of us are finding this quite a difficult item, really.
It is a difficult item, Chair.
Tell me about it. I'm trying to chair.
There's no getting away from that.
So we're faced with two different things, though. We're faced with immediacy and a long-term strategy where there hasn't been a very clear picture for some time, and it's always hard to balance that. I agree with Margaret when you say that these shouldn't be made on a school-to-school basis. But from what you said before, Taryn, this is part of a bigger picture, and this is a targeted funding for the immediate need of a cohort just about to enter secondary placement, rather than this is part of a longer-term strategy. Is that right? So we're going to come to the bigger picture, aren't we, when we look at the budget position?
There is an immediacy about it. There's no getting around that. And however, Clare Mount, whether it would be expanded on its own car park with mobiles, expanded with something concrete, literally concrete being built, or expanded by moving somewhere else, if there was anywhere vacant, anywhere to move it into, that would have been part of the bigger picture, because Clare Mount is such an excellent facility that parents want to go to. And also the next paper coming up, which I won't try to do now, I'll wait till then, but Foxfield as well, that's another excellent school.
Yeah. Right. We're going to have to bring this to a conclusion, because we are not going to get a wider strategy document here at the table tonight, are we? So, I agree with Catherine, who says that we need to sit down as a sector and have a look at the demographic within the Wirral. We look at future placements and get to the bottom of the funding deficit. We're not in a position to do that tonight. We have to either agree or not agree with this. I don't think we're going to come to any bigger picture. There's not going to be a epiphany at this meeting where we suddenly see the light. We are faced with a question: can we agree to these places for 10 more students funded at that funding line at 10,000 per pupil? But what we can do, though, as a forum, say that we do need to review this, and we need to get some idea of strategy going forward, and it has to be in light of the emerging budget deficit, which we will come to later. So, do we have any final questions before we proceed to vote on this? Because we do need to reach a conclusion on this evening. I can't see any hands up. Okay, I can't see. Sue, can you see any hands up? I'm struggling between screens here. No? Okay, so in that case, in regard to question 3.1, agree to an increase for Claremont Specialist Sports College from September 2020 from 216 places to 226 places. That's 10 additional places. So for 3.1, can we use the chat box and write 3.1 agree, 3.1 disagree, 3.1 abstain? So if you can make those on the chat now.
One, two. One, two, three, 4, 5. God. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Be a short pause.
7,
Pause while
8,
Sue has to take her socks off if it goes past 10.
10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Right, 18. Right, 18 agree. And 1, 2, 3, and 3 abstentions. Oh, yeah, and 3 abstentions.
Okay. Thank you, Sue. Okay, let's see if we can do this one as well. So the places receive a base level of 10,000 plus their banding per pupil. So it would be 3.2 agree, 3.2 disagree, and 3.2 abstain. Okay?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Jump again.
So I think it's 16 agree. So
Right. My chat's all gone funny. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6,
I think it's 16.
7, 8.
Yeah.
10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Yeah, 16.
Okay, and finally for 3.3, can we do the same? 3.3 agree, 3.3 disagree, 3.3 abstain.
2, 3. 1, 2. I'm having a nightmare controlling the chat, just bear with me.
Okay. I think that's 16 as well.
Yeah, 16 again.
Okay. Okay, so that makes the decision yes to that one, those three. Thank you very much. Okay, so if we can move on then to agenda item 5, and there are a lot of things in common with item 4 in item 5. So, Taryn, can you try and keep it as brief as possible? And if we can read the recommendations with the same understanding as we've just shown for the Clare model, that would be great. Tarun?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just thank the head teacher, governors and some of the staff who helped me from Claremont understand their school, the profile of needs and how they provide excellent provision for the children and young people of Wirral. Foxfield.
Can we make that note, please, Sue?
Foxfield, another excellent school in Wirral that meets the needs of children and young people. It's a different special educational needs and disabilities profile in Foxfield. So there are many things similar in the report to Claremont, an increase in places, a different number, the same principle, but it's a completely different profile of needs. So we would not expect the young people who go to Foxfield to be accommodated in a mainstream school with a little bit of extra cash. It's not that situation at all. So Foxfield, I was informed by a colleague that the governors would be responsive to an increase in place numbers for this September. I went to see them. It was a very frank and open meeting in which, again, the head teacher needs to be thanked personally for his forbearance and explaining to me the Foxfield pupil profile, how they meet needs, and their physical environment, because it's very different from the Claremont environment. So where we got to was there's a slight discrepancy on the number, which it may come in the meeting. We knew this at the time of meeting the governors. There was one place was in question, was it getting the £10,000 or not? We've since found out it wasn't. But what the governors are saying is all the children there, because of the severity of their needs, I think we call it complex needs in Wirral, that all the children need £10,000 place funding plus their banding. And I went through a process in their school where we talked this through with them, and this has been going on for some time with Foxfield and the local authority. So I think there was some healthy scepticism that we would actually move this forward. But move it forward we have. Here we are now discussing it. So we do genuinely believe that the Foxfield numbers are increasing. They're not just increasing with the immediacy, but the longer term. We've seen the numbers coming through from our excellent schools, Ellery and Stanley. And what will happen in 2 or 3 years' time, based on the year groups people are in, there will be more people wanting to go to Foxfield, because Foxfield's cohort, the majority come from Ellery and Stanley. So tonight's particular issue is centred on year 7, the immediacy. But what came through loud and clear in the last discussion was people want to see a larger picture, the strategy as people referring to it. And that is definitely being looked at with Foxfield. So even though we're only asking you for a small number of places that we've agreed with the governing body and the head teacher, 6 places, we do know that if you agree this, that year 7, as it moves through the school in subsequent years, we will need to look at the built environment, not just the number of places. And we're bringing those two things, like I've said, together, the capital funding, the high needs funding, and now because of the DSG, the finance colleagues as well. Yeah, so we're saying from 2022, there will be a clear lack of physical physical places available at Foxfield. So if we get agreement tonight, that will help an immediate situation. But we've still got this looming position in a couple of years' time as that cohort moves through the school we'll have to deal with. If you agree these additional 6 places, we will rectify one place that we thought was being funded at £10,000 but actually isn't. So the actual ask is for 6 additional places, but the effect will be all 147 places will get £10,000 if you agree it. Otherwise there'll just be one young person in the school not getting the funding.
Okay. Right. So Elaine has picked up on the bit about parental choice not being the driver for special. Elaine, do you want to? Well, Tony, you can see the question. Do you want to talk about the admissions process and the selection process for Foxfield? It isn't surely that any parent who expresses a preference can get their child into that school, is it?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair. We have without wishing to go into any detail whatsoever, we have I think it's 3 appeals ongoing about parents expressing preferences for Foxfield, and we've said the assessed need would indicate otherwise. So it's not just a question of you ask and you can get in. It's not like that at all. It's all assessed need, but not to put too fine a point on it, the profile of needs for these young people, when you need to go to Foxfield, the complexity and severity of their need, you need to go to Foxfield. It's not usually a borderline decision.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Catherine's just followed up with the question: Is there capacity in elsewhere in the special sector or the high needs sector for any of those children? Are there any schools that are under capacity that we aren't utilising fully that could take the pressure off these schools where we've got increasing roles?
We have another school called Meadowside that deals with a similar profile, and we will hoping to work with those governors and in the larger strategy that we're putting together. How do we support their offer? How do we make their offer known to our parents?
Okay, so is there sorry to jump on Catherine's question there, but is there capacity at Meadowside to take some of those children, perhaps?
There would be some capacity, not much, but some capacity.
Elaine, put your hand
Yeah,
up.
we completely understand the processes and protocols to get that children are allocated special schools. That's the issue. The issue really is around some schools. This conversation about them being popular, that's irrelevant. It's about need, about capacity, it's about planning. So I'm not against Foxfield or any other school getting extra places. It's about a due process within a strategic view. It's not about some schools being put forward as being popular. I don't think that's the right tone or language to use in this forum. That was my question, really.
Okay, noted. Rebecca has asked about the 40 places in section 2.8. Do we have an idea of where those 40 places are going to be set aside? Taryn?
Yeah, we had previously agreed 23 places at Ellery. The forum have been kind enough to agree 10 places at Clare, takes us to 33. We've identified one place at Foxfield that should have been getting the 10,000 but wasn't. That's just an administrative error that the governors pointed out and we've sorted out with them, which takes us to 34, and then we're asking for 6 now. So if yourselves agree 6 now, we're at 40.
Okay. So Catherine's asked, would it be sensible then for Meadowside to absorb some of that additionality, some of that, rather than putting them at Foxfield? Is there a reason why Foxfield is more suitable?
Well, it's parental preference. So when the schools can meet the need, we then there's no reason why you don't go with parental preference unless it's incompatible with the efficient education of others. So if the places are not agreed tonight,
Yeah.
we could obviously go back and have a conversation with the governing body of Foxfield and the leadership. Depending on the outcome of that, we might have to go to Meadowside and say we can't have those 6 places, so they might be coming to you instead. But I can't predict the outcome of those discussions. I can only tell you that we'd have to have those discussions.
Okay, and these are the most vulnerable children with the most complex learning needs.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat.
Adrian,
Yes.
can I just pick up on Rebecca's question there about the 40 places it's been set aside for?
Can indeed, Sean.
Taryn, you mentioned the 10 places agreed for Claremont just now, and then the places for Foxfield we're talking about now, and you mentioned 23 places for Ellery Park as well.
Yeah.
I just wanted to sort of clarify, is that an additional 23 places? Because
No,
because Ellery Park had Ellery Park had an additional 23 places from last September, didn't they? September 2019.
Yeah.
And those 23 places are now included as part of the permanent budget, so that they're not within that 40 places.
Okay.
So it's just to clarify, it would still leave, if this was agreed, it would still leave sufficient funding for a further 23 places as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we double counted there, Chair.
Okay. I've got somebody saying no, we're full. Who is that? Sorry, I can't see a name on that one.
I think that's Margaret. Yeah.
Margaret, yes. Thank you, Margaret. So Ellery are full.
So, Chair, sorry, it was me there.
Sorry.
Can I just...
Yes.
Sorry, I can't hold my hand up. So it was an additional 34 places, so there's still 23 available. Is that what you're saying? The funding for 23 places is still available, Sean?
Yes.
Across special?
Yes.
Okay.
That looks like what's being said.
Just to kind of muddy the waters a little bit more on that one, though.
Where would they be? Would be my second part of that question.
So just to clarify, the pot of money we're talking about is it was £400,000 included within the budget for the equivalent of a full year place for 40 extra places in special schools. So we're again talking about 10 for Claremont and potentially 7 here for Foxfield. But those would be part year places because we're not going to. Taryn in his report is asking for the funding from September.
So can I just clarify then, Sean? The 23 places were already funded to Ellery. So even if it's part of a year, there's still 23 places available across the special schools. But where would they be?
Well, I don't know. Okay. So the intention when the budget was set, that was agreed in January, was that there's the equivalent of the place funding for the equivalent of 40 places, additional places in special schools. But those weren't for any set aside for any particular schools. Otherwise, it would have just been included in that school's budget. The intention was that funding could be used to provide schools with additional place funding where it was felt they were needed, and that's what Taryn's doing now for Claremont and Foxfield. And we've heard before there's other schools asking for it as well. So it's just a pot of funding that's available where it's deemed necessary that a school needs to take additional pupils and needs the funding to do so.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt there. So we're in a position where there has been a budget set aside for an increase in this sector. Yeah?
Yep.
And so this isn't going to put any additional pressure on that sector because it's already been included in the budget. This is just an allocation of that budget. Is that right?
Correct.
So in making these decisions, we're not taking any money that hasn't been placed elsewhere. We're not putting anything more into the deficit. We are simply allocating a set of resources that was agreed at a previous forum meeting.
That's right, yep.
Okay, so so hopefully that answers some of those questions that are being typed in there. So the budget is already here for this. This is an allocation decision of an existing budget. So questions about capacity, we should be exploring those as part of a strategy. But this isn't taking a new set of funding anywhere. So this is just an allocation decision. Is that am I right with that, Sean?
That's right. Yep. Exactly.
Okay. The decision then is just about allocation. Are we? I'm just reading. Sorry about pausing there. I'm just reading through some of the comments that are coming through. Catherine, can you just articulate that concern that you're raising there?
Yeah, I mean, for about 18 months to 2 years now, there's a special school and a mainstream primary school, that just happen to be two that I'm involved with, that have been pursuing how we can support our local community with places both in special and mainstream. We've met with various people in the local authority, and our plans don't seem to go anywhere. I'm not saying that they are the plans that would be settled upon, but it seems there's no joining together of gathering what's going on in local areas in Wirral as to how needs can be met, and this sort of solution can be found. And it goes back to what Elaine says. It's this. I understand there's a need here tonight for some immediate decisions, but long term, there are heads and schools out there working together with ideas that we just can't seem to get those shared. Nobody seems to want to take those on board, and that's really frustrating.
Yes, I think, Catherine, we've been frustrated for a while with the idea of creating a strategy, haven't we? And we've had various people trying to pull the strategy together, and we seem to be spending money and not getting very far. One of the things that I'm going to ask later on in the agenda is that we have a high needs working group meeting where we can just try and get some clarity around anything that's going on in this, because we do need to speed up this strategy, don't we? I don't think that we're perpetuating the mess that you refer to, Elaine, in that this funding has already been allocated to these 40 additional places. So this is one would expect to be making these decisions at this time, given that we've put this budget in for allocation. We've already acknowledged at the previous forum that there were going to be an increase in 40 places, and so where they go is Taryn's recommendation. So I think those two are different conversations, aren't they? So can we? Mark, that your question is a key one there about the future capital. But Taryn, do you want to ask that question about the capital?
For Foxfield?
For Foxfield, yes.
Yeah, there is a capital component because the physical environment won't be big enough when the children move through the school. Well, that's why I mentioned earlier, we're working with Mike Woosley and Jeanette Royal. We're trying to bring three things together: the capital expenditure, which Mike and Jeanette look at, the high needs funding, which I get involved in, and the sufficiency of places that we need, that we talk to individual governing bodies about. There is definitely a capital component to the Foxfield. It's just not immediately now.
And that is something that you can see a permanent need for an increase in that provision.
Yeah, yes. We could also see where we would build it on the site if we were to have the capital funding to do it. And the other thing that you may hear every now and again in a meeting but not see the movement on it is there's a special provision capital fund from the government, and that needs to be brought in line with the capital funding that Mike Woosley and Jeanette can access, either from the council or the DFE, and then into the high needs. So those three things need to be brought together, which we're going to attempt to do, Chair.
Okay, right. I think we need to bring this point to a conclusion then. So, if we can just go through this recommendations, and we'll come back to the high needs funding later on. So, if we can, as before, indicate or agree, disagree, or abstain on 3.1. So, if you can, on the chat, the agree in the increase in funded places for Foxfield School from September 2020 from 141 places to 147 places, and that is 6 additional places. So if we can enter your chat for 3.1 agree, 3.1 disagree, or 3.1 abstain. Okay, Sue, have you got those numbers?
Sorry, I didn't have my mic on, sorry. 11 for and 5 abstentions.
Okay.
I will double check these after the meeting just to make
Yeah.
sure I've counted them right, but I think I got them that time.
If we go 3.2 then, agree, 3.2 disagree, or 3.2 abstain, agree that 147 Foxfield school places receive a base level funding of £10,000 per place from September 2020, plus their banding for each individual pupil. So if we write 3.2, agree, disagree, or abstain. Okay. If we can count these later, that's fine. And 3.3 then, that the additional 6 funded places be included in the deadline for the high needs place change notification process in November. So agree, 3.3 agree, disagree, or abstain. Okay, Sue, have you got those numbers for us?
Just bear with me, sorry. I think it's 11 again.
Yeah.
And 6 abstentions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2. Yeah, I think it's 6 abstentions.
Okay. Okay, so that's that resolution carried. Okay, thank you very much for that, Turin. That was the lengthy one. Thank you, everybody, for your questions on that one. If we can then move then to item number 6, which is the report on the school's budget outturn. And this is Adrian. Are you here, Adrian?
Yes, I am, and thank you, Chair.
Okay.
I hope you can hear me okay. So yeah, basically starting on the school's budget outturn report for 2019-20. Overall, the school's budget was overspent by 1.2 million. This is an improvement on the position reported at the January meeting, where the overspend was forecast at 1.8 million. It's important to note that the 1.2 million overspend is a cumulative closing position, and thus reflects the position after use of the opening balance in the DSG reserve. And also important to note that at this time the accounts are provisional and subject to audit. There's a detailed table in Appendix 1 of the report where it compares the budget with actual spend in detail, but this is summarised at the front of the report in 1.3. Along with reasons for variances. I'm not going to go into every area, but I'm going to talk about the main reasons for variances identified in the table in 1.3. So if we just start off at the schools block, 5.639 million underspend, and this was mainly due to the Bebington High School converting to academy status from the 1st of April 2019, and this underspend is offset by reduced DSG income later. In terms of the schools de-delegated, 207,000 overspend was shown, which is due to special staff costs, where there have been a significant increase in the level of maternity leave amongst staff at primary and secondary schools. Moving on to the high needs block, 1.495 million overspend is shown, which is mainly due to an increase in the number and complexity of cases. There's also been a significant increase in the high needs budget for 2021, with gross fund increasing by around 6 million. Moving on to the early years block, there was a 498.6k underspend, and this is mainly due to take up of the offer for 3 and 4-year-olds being less than expected, although demand is growing. In addition, the Disability Access Fund has had fewer requests than planned. EFSA have stated that they expect authorities to spend any additional funding over and above DAF actually paid out in the 2019-20 on services in line with the principles and aims of DAF. So on that basis, it is expected that the underspend of 63.9 for 1920 will be carried forward into 2021 along with the prior year underspends. Since the 2019 financial year closed to transactions, further charges for 2019-20 of 67.2 thousand have been identified for early years activity, which were paid in 2021. So basically, to avoid the pressure on the 2021 budget, it is proposed that 67.2 thousand of the 2020-21 DSG reserve be ring-fenced to meet these costs. I'm now moving on to the dedicated schools grant section. This was reduced income of 5.554 million, and this was mainly due to Bebington High School that converted to academy status with effect from the 1st of April 2019, as noted above. And then moving on to the use of reserves. At the time, the 2019-20 budget was set, it is expected a contribution of 2.3 million would be available from the DSG reserve to contribute to the budget. And the actual surplus put forward into 29-20 was actually 2.2 million. Despite the availability of the surplus in 2019-20, an overspend still occurred, leaving an overall deficit of 1,264,000 in the DSG reserve. This is an improvement on the forecast deficit position that was reported in the schools form in January. And as noted previously, there's a development of a deficit recovery plan is currently in the planning stages. So Schools Forum is asked to basically note this report and the financial position of the school's budget for 2019-20, and also to agree the ring fence of 245,305 of DSG for 2021, and that's broken into two parts: the Disability Access Fund underspend of £178,140, and the early years late charges, as mentioned above, for 2019-20 for 67,165. And then finally to agree that the High Needs Working Group meets with the heads of service for SEND and inclusion and finance business support colleagues to discuss the council's deficit recovery plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your brevity, Adrian. Much appreciated. So a couple of questions on this. The first one from Elaine, which is regard to the early years foundation stage, which is the underspend. And the question is, what happens to the underspend for the early years? And I think that this is what you've included in the ring fence for the underspend. Is that right? Adrian, sorry.
Sorry, I just passed that to, if I may, just pass that over to Christine Thompson.
Yes, certainly. Hi, Christine.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Hi, yeah. Sorry, can I just pick up on the question? So do you mean the underspend on the early years block in total?
Yes.
Yeah, essentially the only formal carry forward, if you like, for the early years block is the Disability Access Fund, because that's the element that has to be spent on that activity. The rest of the underspend on early years is just there's, and hopefully Sean, I'm asking this because I'm quite new to this, I'm asking if Sean might correct me on this, is that if I'm incorrect, is that the remainder of the underspend isn't carry forward and ring fence for early years, but it's just netted off, if you like, against the whole of the spend for the whole of the DSG activity. Can I ask Sean just to give me a nod if that interpretation's correct?
Yep. Yeah, that's
right. Thank you,
Christine. Yeah.
So it's very hard to predict where that underspend is going to be because it is spend against need, and if there isn't any uptake, it can't be spent. Yeah. So the question is what we can do to encourage people to take up those places, isn't it?
Yes. Correct.
Elaine, does that answer your question?
I think it's more a concern around this huge need in early years, isn't that, as we'd all agree? And around, it seems like it's lost opportunity. It's not a blame thing. What can we do to encourage even now children to be attending, and also the people that have got those children, the 2-year-olds particularly, it's hugely costly for that provision. Is there anything that we can do in order to give extra support to those rather than it just be lost in the ether, really?
I think the responsibility is on the providers. Carol, you put your hand up. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just to comment on that. This is sorry, background noise. This is something the early years working group is particularly focusing on moving forward in terms of understanding the budget components thoroughly. And we have at the last meeting, the school forum reps that are here today and wider have asked the finance team to present it in the components, and then we can build a spend plan around that and clearly identify. In terms of the underspend around the take up of places, that's a difficult one because again that goes on your census and then whether parents actually engage in that process. But the other areas where we can affect some activity around the Disability Access Fund and Inclusive Practice Fund, then definitely in terms of the spend plans. So that is a focus for us moving forward.
I think it's in all of our interests to get as many of our youngsters in as possible into that programme because it's really effective. But I think we heard in your report before, Carol, the Working Party and all of the providers have been working really hard to try and up that figure. So if we can then move on to the recommendations. Okay, so the first one is that we note the report, and I think that we've noted that report. So the second one is about ring fencing of the 245,305 of the DSG into the Disability Access Fund, underspend of 178,000, and the early years late charges. So if we can use that as 8.2, those in favour, right, 8.2 agree, 8.2 disagree, or 8.2 abstain. If we can just write that now, please. That looks unanimous to me. Thank you for that. And the 8.3 is that this isn't for voting, but this is that we need to set a date for the high needs working group, given the scale of the challenge and the urgency with which we've been talking about high needs. So when we come to set the work plan, if those members who are associated with the high needs working group, if we can get our diaries ready for that, and that is under item 11. But we can definitely note that we do need to meet in the near future, whether that be at the end of this term or at the start of next term. So any more questions on that item from anybody? Okay. Thank you very much for that, Adrian. Thank you. So we now move on to item 7, which is the budget update. It's you again, Adrian.
Yep.
Is that right?
That's right.
You lucky boy.
Thank you very much.
So can you talk us through this paper, please? Thank you, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Okay, so the next report is the update on the 2021-21 budget. The school budget for 2021 was agreed by Schools Forum at its meeting in January. The budget and recommendations from Schools Forum was subsequently agreed by Cabinet at its February meeting, and then later by the Council at its March meeting. The report basically outlines changes to the budget and provides an updated detailed budget schedule in Appendix 1. Essentially, since the January meeting, 1.7 million of budget has been reallocated to delegated and de-delegated activities. The adjustments needed to reflect academy recruitment are in progress, and this will result from the release of 466,000 growth fund into the DSG grant income budget. It's also noted that the 2020 budget allocation is expected to return a surplus of 644,000 to contribute to the overall 1.264 million surplus, deficit brought forward from 1920. Schools Forum are asked to note this report. Thank you,
Okay.
Chair.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Once again, we applaud the brevity. Any questions for Adrian on that? Excellent. Thank you, Adrian. That report is noted. So if we can now move on to agenda item 8, which is Sean. Welcome back, Sean.
Thank you. This will probably be my last time. I think I've probably said that last time, but I think this will be my last one. So I'll keep this really quick. Hello, everybody. So it's been a while since the last meeting in January, so I'll just kind of refresh your memories a little bit. I brought proposals in November and January forums around the school's funding formula, and that the national funding formula factor rate should be adopted with the maximum permitted 1.84% minimum funding guarantee. With that MFG, we still didn't need to cap any schools that were due to gain from the formula, so we agreed that any remaining funding from the schools block would be held in the in a fall enroll and held in fall enroll and growth funds. Forum approved that in January, and it was subsequently approved by Cabinet and Council. So once the national funding formula factor rates and the MFG are applied to the pupil data, £466,000 was left for the two funds, and we'd agreed that the proposed criteria would be brought to the May's forum meeting, which obviously was then cancelled. So this report proposes the criteria for accessing the two funds, and just highlights some of the regulations around the growth funds and falling roles funds. I must confess at this point, in November and January, I hadn't realised that as part of submitting individual school budgets to the funding agency, we were also required to submit the criteria for the two funds, and apparently to be agreed by Schools Forum at a later date wasn't sufficient. So the proposed criteria included within the report was submitted to the ESFA as provisional, and they did confirm that were it to be adopted, it doesn't meet the schools and early years funding regulations. So just to summarise the criteria for the growth fund, it would be for maintained schools and academies, with growth of 6.5% over budgeted pupil numbers at the October census. The funding would be equivalent to the basic entitlement factor, or ORPU, for the additional pupils over the 6.5%, and it would be prorated for the relevant funding period, which for maintained schools is September to March, and for academies is September to August. In terms of the falling roles fund, again, it would be for maintained schools and academies with an Ofsted rating of good or outstanding. It would be applied where the numbers on roll is less than 80% of the published admission numbers, and that those surplus places would be required within the following 3-year period. And the funding to be paid would be equivalent to the basic entitlement factor again for the number over and above the 6.5% threshold. And the recommendations are that Schools Forum note the report and the proposed criteria is adopted. Thank you.
Okay, has anybody got any questions for Sean? I have a couple, and the first one, Sean, is that when we agreed in the earlier forum to put that money aside, we didn't indicate that it would be split down the middle into two equivalent funds. And I just raise why this might be a concern. It may be a concern because it would appear that the falling roles fund has some criteria which is fairly difficult to hit. And my understanding was that schools with falling roles are already protected by the lag funding because they are funded at a slightly higher rate per pupil, because their funding is based on a higher number of pupils. So would it, if we were going to split that fund separately, we didn't make a decision as a forum on the equivalency of those two pots? That's the first question. Is there an answer for that? Only that it appears that schools with falling roles are doubly protected then, whereas schools with rising roles are not.
Well, when you say double protected, schools with a falling role would lose funding on a lagged basis in the same way that schools who are growing would gain funding on a lagged basis. In terms of the funds being split, the recommendations to November's forum, which was approved, did say any remaining funding would be split between a growth fund and a falling roles fund. So just to clarify on that, the recommendation that was approved did refer to two separate funds. In the regulations, it talks about a growth fund and a falling roles fund, and it sort of has specific criteria that they must meet, and certain things that can be funded and can't be funded from those funds. It doesn't talk about a combined fund, so I think based on the regulations, it would be difficult to have a workable combined fund, and we do have to report them to the DfE separately as part of the submission. I understand your point you're making. The two funds wouldn't be dependent on one another, and it does mention in the report about what would happen if either of the funds were to overspend or underspend during the year. At the end of the year, and should choose my word carefully here. They're not necessarily limited funds, so the 466,000 in terms of the report was split equally, £233,000 each. That doesn't mean that if there was a large demand on the growth fund, that it would be limited to 233,000. If the demand was there that it needed more funding than that, then we'd have to pay the schools that funding, and it would be an overspent on that budget. And similarly with the falling roles fund, if the conditions weren't met, there would be an underspend on that fund.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Also, in the falling roles fund, one of the criteria is that it is only accessible to good or outstanding schools. Is there a rationale behind that?
Other than it's referred to in the regulations, or I can't remember if that was a requirement or a suggestion of the regulations. We'd have to go back and check that.
It just strikes me as if the school is falling roles and is struggling, not protecting them from that falling role just because they've got a requires improvement badge would be something that wouldn't necessarily support those schools should they need that support. Just a question.
No, and I'd have to go back. I'd have to go back and check the regulations whether that's a requirement of the fund, or if that's a suggestion. And I'll be honest, I haven't plucked this criteria from thin air. It's come from the required or suggested recommendations. So we'd have to go back and check that. So in terms of the recommendations, if you were to approve the fund, then it could be, you're approving it subject to that condition being checked in the guidance.
Okay, so I've got some other questions. So John has asked the 6.5% threshold. Why was that figure chosen?
The figure was based on it's almost like based on an estimate based on the previous year's figures. So what would have been paid out the previous year, that it came to, in terms of how much funding we've got to allocate, it worked out that to use that funding would have been around about 6.5% growth.
Okay, so it just in my mind, it would have been handy for when we were looking at the funding formula, if we'd have seen those criteria, the threshold criteria, so that we might have had some view of it as a forum might have been handy. I don't know what colleagues feel, because we I think in good faith we said we needed a protection for schools that are growing and shrinking. Yeah. But I don't remember seeing that detail of it when we did the approval of the budget.
No, similarly, the data wasn't available at the time, so it wasn't withheld. Within good faith, it was proposed to have these funds because you'll remember that we had a kind of unexpected increase in the DSG funding, so there wasn't a sort of significant amount of time to analyse the data and calculate it. So, we agreed at the time that the criteria would be proposed or devised and proposed in the next forum meeting.
Okay, and so maybe just a thought, or I'm thinking of colleagues in the room who might want to see have a little look at those criteria and see whether we need to think about that and put a caveat into this recommendation and proposal. I don't know what the thoughts of forum would be. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I mean, in terms of sort of allocating the funds, the two, the growth fund and the fallen roles funds, nothing's going to happen until the autumn term anyway. So if you wanted to defer the decision until September, and if you're happy with this, Adrian, to bring back some data to the next meeting.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was Adrian Bellingham. Sorry, if you're happy to agree to that.
Adrian?
Yes, can you hear me there now? Sorry, I think my mute wasn't working very well. Yep, that's fine. We can review that.
Okay. So I just look around. Do we have? Normally, I'll just look around for people's thoughts on that. Does anybody feel that they're happy to agree the criteria now, or would people prefer to defer it? So let's bring that up by a question. So in 5.1, we note the report. So that can we make a note that we've noted that report? On 5.2, the school agrees the criteria for the 2021 2021 Growth Fund as outlined in paragraph 3.8. So you can write 5.2 agree, 5.2 disagree, 5.2 abstain, or 5.2 defer. If you would like to make your thoughts on that known, that would be great. So it would be 5.2 agree, disagree, abstain, or defer.
Seems pretty unanimous, doesn't it?
Okay. Okay. And then, thank you very much. And then if we can have the same for the falling roll. So this will be 5.3 agree, disagree, abstain, or defer. Okay, so that seems fairly clear. So if we can possibly ask you, Adrian, to bring this back, and then if I can ask all members just to take away those recommendations, and if we can talk through with our relevant sectors our thoughts on that, and is there a feedback mechanism, Adrian, that we could report on our thoughts on that to you before next forum? Would that be something you'd like to hear our thoughts on?
Yeah, yes, it would. Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what would be the best mechanism to get the viewpoints.
Would it be better to do it? Would it be better to do it through Wash and Primary Heads, and then have responses that way?
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with that. I think that sounds like a sensible suggestion.
Yeah, I'd suggest maybe if the chairs of Wash and Primary Heads could email you, Sue. Would that be okay with the kind of summaries from both meetings?
Yeah, if those come to me, that's great.
Okay, should I then put a note to the chairs of the secondary and primary heads groups just to ask for their thoughts so it's official?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I shall do that. Thank you very much, everybody, for that one. Sean, it's lovely to speak to you again. It's been a long time.
Pleasure.
And so if we move on to agenda item 9, which is Sue, is that right?
Yeah.
Which is the balances.
Balances, yeah. So this report advises Forum of the school balances as at the 31st of March with an indication of balances in the 2021 and 21-22 financial years. The final school balances were 7.9 million as at the 31st of March 2020, and taking account of an academy conversion during the year, this was a reduction of £750,000 since the previous year's balance. 21 schools ended the year with a deficit balance, which was 6 more than last year. The majority of them had set a balanced budget. Many of these have now set a balanced budget for the coming year, but there are currently 3 schools with a licence deficit plan, 5 schools in a notice of concern. And since writing the report, I have agreed a further 2 licence deficit plans and have concerns about a further 8 schools that I'm in the process of contacting and speaking to about their issues. The period 9 projections continue to show a downward trend in school balances as costs continue to rise, with 63 schools indicating a deficit budget by March 2022. When we budget, we do tend to build in increasing costs, but we tend to project income probably as a worst case scenario. So they do, at this time of the year, they tend to look a lot worse than by the end of the year. They do sort of get better during the year as we get more information. But I would like to say that head teachers and school finance staff do continue to do great work together with the LMS bursars or their business managers to reduce costs where possible. However, there is further uncertainty around around COVID that's caused problems, and also the teachers' pay grant and teachers' pension grant that's going into the formula. So it's putting an extra strain on school budgets that has been very difficult to manage in this budget setting process this year. That's me done.
Thank you, Sue. I have a question from Kathy, which is about a dialogue around ring fence funding.
Yeah, if that's possible. I've just been speaking to my colleague head teachers from Maintain Nursery Schools, and it's our understanding that the funding that's increased on the nursery line for the 3 schools should actually be passported in full to those nursery schools. So we were just wondering if we could have a further conversation with around that. Really, I didn't want to take people's time up tonight, but I just wondered if we could arrange a meeting regarding that.
Do you want me to answer that one too?
Yeah, that the 340,000 is the overall balances of the credit balances of the 3 nurseries. But are you talking about the protected funding?
Yes.
And the fact that the protected funding remains the same, so when there's increases, the protection reduces as the costs increase.
We got some costs before the world changed and COVID hit that indicated that the funding that was coming directly from national government to support Maintain Nursery Schools was not completely spent.
Sean, do you
Yeah,
have any insights into that?
A little bit, yeah. So the way the Maintain Nurseries protected funding works, it's similar to the rest of the early years funding, which is based on head counts and pupil numbers claiming the funding, and it's kind of so it's based on 2 separate January censuses. So we don't know the final allocation until after the year end, though we do estimate it. Now I think this year was 1920 was the 4th year of that funding, I think, or maybe the 3rd, I can't remember. But due to it being based on headcount claims, so we pay it out termly as an authority, pay it out to the schools termly. But the allocations from the funding agency to the local authorities, but based on January headcounts, there can be sort of fluctuations between what we receive and what we pay. And that's obviously what you're referring to, I assume. I don't recognise the figure. I don't recognise the figure 3. So go on.
It's not absolutely what I'm referring to. I'm referring to when the funding was first ring-fenced and sent to local authorities. Wirral, Andrew Roberts was still around, and Andrew placed a funding formula around that, sort of an allocation formula that none of the nursery schools kind of agreed to at the time, because it wasn't clear how that funding would be in its entirety passported into nursery budgets. I know the mechanism, and I know how that mechanism works, but there is, as we understand it, an underspend on that funding because of the mechanism, and that therefore means there is an under allocation of funding that comes from national government to Wirral for Maintain Nursery Schools.
So you're looking for a kind of a review of the allocation method for the year?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think
just to make sure that we are benefiting from the funding that comes from national government in recognition of the pickle that nursery schools are in.
Yeah, no, I completely appreciate the position you're in. But
is that a question, Sean, that we could bring to ask for an answer to or a review of in the next meeting? Obviously, well, if we aren't prepared to with the data to answer that.
Well, I was just going to say, Adrian, Carol referred to, Adrian might know this better, Carol referred earlier in her report to a wider consultation in the autumn term around the makeup of the formula, unless I misheard that. So I'm not sure if Carol's still on the line, but if she could confirm whether that would include the nursery funding as well.
Hi, yeah, I am still on the line. I think it will to a point, but I think what our Maintain Nursery School head teachers are asking for is a specific focus around the elements of their funding. I don't recognise the figure myself, so I think yes, to a point, yes, because it's the early years funding formula across all provision. But I think head teachers of maintained nurseries are just asking for a bit more of a deep dive into the setting of that budget.
Okay.
Is that right, Kathy?
Yes, that's you've absolutely, yes, in a nutshell, yes. Thank you, Carol.
So if we raise that point and ask that to be addressed in the next forum meeting, that would give an opportunity for people to have those conversations and then report back to forum. Would that suit you, Kathy?
Adrian, that would be perfect. Thank you. We would really appreciate that.
Okay, so Sue, can you put a note in the minutes, please, to that effect? That question needs to be investigated, and we will ask that question as a point in the next forum, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Okay. Any more questions on this? We have two actions, and I would like to ask a third on that. So the first of all, that we note the forum, so I think we can agree that that's been noted. And two is that we continue to monitor the balances, especially in this coming time. And I think with forum's permission, I would like a third question, is that in the autumn term, we as a forum consider the costs taken on by COVID and the financial impact of COVID is assessed in terms of all of the schools. Is everybody happy that we agree that as a recommendation? That will require us to do some digging in our own sectors to get some reports back. But I think it's quite important because for a lot of us, the impact of COVID has been not only social but financial as well. So if we can, I'm seeming to get agreement there. So can we add that as a third recommendation, that we assess the impact of COVID and the costs associated with it at the next forum? Sue, you're on mute. Is that okay? Thank you very much for that. Okay, thank you everybody. So we're just going on to item 11 now, which is just a very brief overview of the work plan. Sue, do you want to just talk us through that? Is there anything we need to note on this?
Sorry, I'm just on my minutes page. The work plan is not greatly different to previous years, rolling the meetings over. I do have some suggested dates for the following meetings, which replicate similar dates to the meetings this year, but sticking to Tuesdays at 4 o'clock rather than Wednesdays at 6 like they used to be. And I think certainly this is probably worked out to be a better time.
We need to iron out the glitches out of Teams if we're going to do it virtually, I think. But hopefully by September or November we'll be able to meet again.
Yeah, I think I've put that in the minutes, just a sec. I've got no paper, you see, so I'm jumping from one screen to another here. The next date I'm proposing to be Tuesday the 29th of September.
Okay, so if we hold that and then consider more dates on Tuesday when we've got a little time to...
Right. Well, I've put some suggested dates together, so if we put them all in,
go on then.
And then they'll be part of the minutes that we can maybe have a chat about at the next meeting.
Okay, that'd be great. So fire away with November.
The Tuesday the 10th of November.
Yeah.
Tuesday
January.
the 19th.
Yeah.
Tuesday the 19th of January 2021.
Yeah.
Tuesday the 11th of May 2021. And Tuesday the 29th of June 2021. However, I was asking whether the minimum number of meetings that we need is 4, and we currently have 5, and whether the May 1 and June 1 could be merged and maybe be brought sort of somewhere in between the two dates, rather than having 2 meetings, unless we specifically need 2 meetings.
Okay. if we can just give people a chance to consider that, if we can make that decision in the September meeting, that will give us plenty of time to consider it. Only that the May one was pushed forward from April because it was budget reporting at the year end, and the June one was brought back from July, so they've got closer together. But we will take people's thoughts. If people can have a think about that, and we'll ask that question in September, if that's okay. And then in terms of the working parties, I will be writing to the high needs working group to try and get a meeting in before that 29th of September. And Tarun, if I can include you in that, then we can see if we can find a date that's mutually agreeable, that we can start having a chat about that budget deficit recovery plan.
That's fine, Chair.
Is that okay?
That's brilliant.
Has anybody got any other business? Okay, in that case, thank you all so much for persevering with the technology and my flapping around between two screens, which I found difficult to manage. But thank you very much, and I hope you all have a safe summer. Thank you for your contributions this evening. Thank you. Keep safe. Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Adrian. Bye now.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.